On your Thursday episode of Locked On Raptors, can Pacome Dadiet, Bobi Klintman, or Johnny Furphy overcome their extremely bust-worthy names? We'll get into all that on today's show as we dig into three more potential wing targets for the Raptors. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, June the 20th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the website that don't work so good, at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and of course, you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, baby. The link is in the description of the podcast. It's free to join, and it's a great place to come hang out among friends, people just like you who love the Raptors, who like the podcast, who want to talk about the podcast, who want to talk about the Raptors and the draft and all that stuff. Come hang out. We would love to see you there and become part of our growing listener community over on the Discord. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcasts. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, all that good stuff. It's always appreciated when you support the show, however it is you choose to support the show. And you can also find us on YouTube as well. If that's your preference, you can go to the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button. Then next to that, you can hit the notification bell button, and that will give you a push notification every single time the show is about to premiere or go live, so you never miss a second of that Locked On Raptors action, hot off the presses, or whatever the video version of a press is. Either way, thanks for being here. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, let's get rolling on today's show. We are talking about three of the potential Toronto Raptors wing targets that we've yet to cover here on the show. We've covered basically all of them, and I will have to admit, the guys we're going to talk about today, I've been reticent to buy into, reticent to really give much consideration to, simply because they have bust names. If you are in the Locked On Raptors Discord, you're familiar with the concept of bust names. Look, sometimes you can look at all the film you want, but sometimes a guy's name is just Johnny Furphy, and it makes you question whether or not that person can be a super successful top 1% of 1% NBA basketball player. But hey, there's some interesting stuff with Johnny Furphy, as there is with Bobi Klintman and Pacome Dadiet, the three wings we're going to talk about today. Look, sometimes if you're skilled enough, you got all the tools in the world, you can overcome having a bust name. We've seen it done before. I would argue Gradey Dick, I think, has overcome being a clear guy with an obvious bust name. Good stuff there. We'll talk about Gradey Dick a little bit later on as well, as we talk about his Kansas pal, Johnny Furphy. But I want to start off with Pacome Dadiet, the 6'9" wing out of France, currently playing for Ratiopharm Ulm, which is a very fun German team name in the German league. Ratiopharm sounds like me when I post about how the Raptors should have just paid Pascal Siakam the money the Pacers got him yesterday, but I digress. Look, Pacome Dadiet, let's kind of get into the tail of the tape on him here. A fascinating player who's kind of risen up draft boards as I think just sort of the interminable draft period has continued on. And, you find your favorites overseas, guys who maybe there's a little bit less tape on, a little less known about. But as you dig further into the tape, you dig further into the stats and the scouting and what people are saying about him, the sort of reputation rises and the projected draft slot rises. And that's very much the case with Pacome Dadiet, who I think at this point, I'd be surprised based on everything you hear, everything that's written about him, all the videos you'll watch, et cetera, we'll be pretty surprised if Dadiet doesn't end up being drafted in the first, say, 40 picks on draft night. And it's pretty obvious to see why, right? He's a 6'9" wing who can shoot threes and has some self-creation upside. Those types of players get drafted. It's just the toughest thing to find is playable, functional NBA wings who help elongate your lineups, who help tie all your lineups together. The Raptors are in dire need of these types of players, having just traded Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, and to a lesser extent, Precious Achiuwa, who I think elongated those lineups defensively, at least, less so on offense. And Pacome Dadiet, of all the guys in this draft, might have the most sort of untapped upside of these wing types because The dude is 18 years old. He won't turn 19 until just before the new season begins. One of, I think, the 4 youngest prospects in the draft. I think that's where he lines up. Super young and checks a lot of, hypothetical boxes if some of the sort of things he's shown that he has a knack for end up projecting to the NBA. Look, I think he is an interesting prospect because a lot of the times when you're talking about sort of swinging on a young player, a lot of it is just sort of, okay, you're doing this for the upside, right? Think about Bruno Caboclo. Ooh, you took that guy. The hope there is, oh, he has like a once in a generation developmental curve and becomes a star player for you. Obviously, that one didn't work. Masai still chasing that Giannis Antetokounmpo dragon 10 years later. I don't think Pacome Dadiet necessarily fits the bill athletically that a Bruno Caboclo does. He's only got a 6'9" wingspan. He's like 6'7 3/4" in shoes based on the combine. So he's not some ridiculous athletic specimen. And I do think that's probably what keeps him a little lower on my own personal board, as I'm not sold on Pacome Dadiet as like a super high level athlete. But again, everything I'm going to say in the next 5 minutes talking about him has to be run through the caveat of he's 18 years old. 18-year-olds get stronger, they get bigger, they get more sort of in tune with how to operate within massive NBA-sized bodies, and they learn things. They pick stuff up as they go along, and everything you read or hear about Pacome Dadiet is that he is a worker. He's a dude who's coachable. He's a guy who's going to fit into a system, take instruction, and there seems to be a pathway to steady improvement for him. It's tough to go off of what he's done in Germany this past season because he just didn't play a whole lot of basketball, right? In 2023-24, in terms of all competitions playing for Ulm, 18 total games played, 6.4 points, 1.6 boards, a third of an assist, just like super low production on just 15 minutes a game. 0.6 steals, 0.2 blocks. The numbers just are not going to go off and sort of, ring any bells for you. It's all based on watching what he does on a floor that you're kind of painting the picture of what he could be one day out of, right? I think some of the stuff is very intriguing that you see in small samples. I think for him, the sort of touch he has as like a potential mid-range shooter, a guy who can get to his own shot and pull up, pretty interesting. Super tiny volume, but he shot better than 50% on pull-up mid-rangers in Germany this past season. And he's got like a super high release point. There does seem to be something there with Pacome Dadiet as a guy who could one day grow into self-creation. And this is sort of kind of going back to the original point I was trying to make was when you look at a guy like Bruno Caboclo, that was like all upside, right? I do feel like there's at least a projectable floor for Dadiet that's interesting of like just like a decent 3-and-D connective type of wing. Maybe not a guy who's going to be a star, but that star potential can creep in when it comes to the self-creation stuff that he's flashed here and there. I'd probably buy a little bit less into it than some people seem to really be keen on him one day growing into being some sort of on-ball scorer. I think he probably ends up being more of just sort of like a connective wing type, but at 19 or 31, if you can get yourself a playable connective wing, that's a good outcome for either of those picks. Although I think I'd prefer to maybe see them swing at 31 as opposed to 19, just because of the number of guys who figure to be on the board at 19 and the different positions they could address as well. Big man for me, I think I'm coming around on the idea of just going for a big at 19 as opposed to a wing. As much as I've been banging the drum for wings this entire offseason, just looking at the way mock draft boards are kind of shaping out, it does feel like 19 is going to be the spot to get one of those highly prized bigs in this draft. Your Khalil Wares, your Yves Missi, your Kyle Filipowskis, your Zach Edey's, whoever your personal preference is. Doesn't seem like those guys are going to still be around. I forgot about the Ron Holmes, my favorite, the Ron Holmes. Doesn't seem like any of those guys are going to be there at 31. And so maybe you take the shot at 19 on a big and your Dadiets, your Bobi Klintmans, your all the other wings we've talked about, you pick whoever is still there at 31. Just based on math, someone you like should still be there based on the sort of broadness of this talent pool. When it comes to Dadiet, the reason I'm not super keen on him having like super high upside as a creator, but again, he's 18 years old, so who knows? I'm talking to my butt here a little bit. He doesn't really seem to have much passing touch to him. And I do think that's got to be the thing that you bring to the table, more even so than, getting to your own shot. Like, look, lots of guys can get to their own shot, but not play make at all. And that's not my personal preference of player archetype or anything like that. We've seen Gary Trent Jr. play basketball. He can get to his own shot from the mid-range. He doesn't really get to the rim. That's a thing Pacome Dadiet also struggles with, unless it's in transition. And so that's to be considered as well. And you also have to consider he's doing it against the German league and a competition that's not super duper high. This isn't Luka Doncic owning the Spanish league or winning EuroLeague MVP at 18 years old. It's a very different sort of starting point for Pacome Dadiet here. And so while I like some of the stuff he brings, the three-point shooting thing looks like it's going to be pretty good all told. He looks like he's, again, like a coachable, smart basketball player, nice cutter, nice transition finisher. I think the creation upside for me falls a little flat as far as projecting it because his passing just doesn't feel like it's there. But again, very little in terms of tape to go off of. So that could totally change one way or another. Dadiet feels like a guy who gets like a full year in the G League with some extra ball in hand reps and things like that to really sort of, hone, okay, this is what he's good at. This is what he's not. And that almost would set up his development trajectory from there, getting a full season of information with the 905 to then put him on whatever track they think is best to get him to where he's going to eventually be. That's kind of my read on Dadiet. I'm not super keen on him overall as like a guy at 19. I would be totally fine if he was the pick at 31. But I'm just a bigger believer in a lot of the guys who figure to be there at 19, whether you're talking wing or big. And I do think the athleticism, again, it's tough with 18-year-olds, right? 18-year-olds grow, they get more comfortable in their bodies, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think physically he profiles as like a defensive ace wing. And without that, with the long, with arms not being longer than 6'9", all that stuff, I kind of think I would rather go towards guys who maybe have higher defensive potential, a couple of whom we're going to talk about coming up later on in the show. But that's the read on Dadiet. Let me know what you think about Dadiet. I think a pretty sort of consensus sleeper, interesting prospect that a lot of people like. I think I'm maybe a little bit less high on him than the consensus seems to be. But again, I'm going through off of like watching 25 minutes of tape of him playing in France. And so I could be totally wrong. And that's fine. You're wrong at 18-year-olds all the time. That's what the draft is all about. We'll come back on the other side. We'll get into Bobi Klintman, a guy who I think a lot of Raptors fans have kind of keyed in on as a potential guy for the Raptors to target. Someone who Sam Vecini at The Athletic had the Raptors taking at 31 in his latest mock draft. We'll get into that. Talk about Bobi Klintman, another bust name who is trying to overcome that burden with his set of pretty interesting tools. We'll do that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, the single best place to buy tickets for the sporting events you want to go to. It's that simple. And look, it's summertime. Maybe you want to go take in a baseball game. The Blue Jays are hot garbage and they make me sad, but going to a game, still tough to beat in the summertime. You go sit down, eat some hot dogs, you talk with friends. It's lovely. You don't even have to watch the Blue Jays, and Game Time can help you get in the door for cheap. You can buy last-minute tickets and get up to 60% off buying tickets just before the beginning of your sports, concerts, comedy, theater events. It's a wonderful thing. Flash deals, you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. You get pictures of your seats, all-in pricing, no surprise fees, the whole 9 yards. There's no reason for you not to be using Game Time to buy your tickets. I just bought tickets on Game Time for Wilco at Massey Hall in the first week of July. Really excited about that. You can go do it too. They're like $55 or something like that. Great price to go see one of the great bands of our time. Go download the Game Time app right now. Create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account. Download the app, of course. Then create an account. And then use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. Back at it here, talking about the wings in this class who I had preconceived notions about because their names felt busty. We continue on with Bobi Klintman. Before we get to Bobi Klintman and all that makes him an interesting player, just a heads up, Locked On Sports Today 24/7 is your all-day streaming channel. Go check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Sorry, not wherever you get your podcasts. It's on YouTube, darn it. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Put it on all day. Just let it run in the background. Instead of listening to Stephen A. Smith have really bad WNBA takes, listen to Locked On Women's Basketball running on that channel all the time. Listen to all of our stuff covering the NBA draft, the Stanley Cup final, big trades in the NBA and NHL. It's all there for you over on Locked On Sports Today 24/7. All right, let's continue on here. Bobi Klintman, the 21-year-old, 6'10" wing who Raptors fans saw play against them in the preseason this year with the Cairns Taipans of the Australian NBL. A guy who played a year at college last season at Wake Forest, flirted with being in last year's draft, decided to pull himself out and went to Australia to play a pathway a lot of guys have actually taken in recent years. And he performed capably, I guess is the, wasn't sexy by any means. He wasn't like, it's a routine case with a lot of these guys who go over and play in Australia. Like, they're not playing super duper heavy minutes. Alex Sarr, the projected potential number one pick in this draft, another guy who played over there and just didn't get like crazy heavy run. 23 games played for Cairns this past season for Bobi Klintman. Played 21.3 minutes a game, averaged 9.7 points, 4.8 boards, just under an assist, about 1.3 stocks per game, so steals plus blocks. Shot 36% from three, 44% overall. His season at Wake Forest, he didn't play a whole lot either. Only started 5 games, played 20 minutes a game. Shot 37% from three on 2.3 attempts. Pretty low counting stats across the board. A very speculative player is Bobi Klintman, I think. And truth be told, not someone I'm super duper high on. I think a lot of Raptors fans are a little higher on him than I am. There's some stuff to like here. He's 6'10" and he moves well, right? Like, that is a pretty nice starting point. The shooting looks like it's going to probably be around average, 36, 37%, both in college and with the Cairns Taipans this past year. And so, that feels like at the very least as just like a standard catch and shoot guy. He feels like he's not going to get run off the floor because it's Brick City. No, like, he's going to be a fine 3-point shooter. I think he's a nice mover again, like I said, nice transition player. I think, anyone, I think this applies for Pacome Dadiet as well. Anyone who figures to be a good runner of the floor who can fill lanes, that's someone who fits beautifully with Scotty Barnes, who we know is one of the single best transition orchestrators in all of basketball. The Raptors this past season were number 1 in transition frequency, number 2 in transition efficiency, and Scotty Barnes is a huge reason for that. It's like an outlier skill. And if the Raptors want to go forward and really build things around transition and Scotty Barnes' ability to conduct in the open floor, getting guys who can fill lanes and finish on the run, not a bad thing. Bobi Klintman would certainly fit there. And I do think Bobi Klintman overall, his offensive profile would fit quite nicely with what the Raptors are trying to do on that end of the floor. His passing, there's some nice little flashes of nice connective passing for him. He can put the ball on the deck a little bit. He's not like an incredible blow-by guy or anything like that, but against the tilted defense, I think there's stuff he can do. And that's really what the Raptors offense is about, right? It's getting the ball, making a quick decision, and being able to do something with the ball, whether it's putting it on the deck and kicking, whether it's, just making the next read in the sequence, whatever it is. It seems like Bobi Klintman's going to be able to do that and fit into a system. He's not going to go commandeer possessions, trying to go play hero ball and create from a standstill. No, he feels very much like a guy who can be a piece and a part of a moving, sort of connected offensive system, which I think is a great thing. He's a nice cutter and all of that. The shooting at the rim, bit of a red flag for a guy who's 6'10", super low volume, very small sample, but against the competition that is the Australian League and not, the NCAA or whatever, shot 57.5% at the rim as a 6'10" guy this past season. I think that's worth noting, at least. Obviously in the NBA, more space, wider driving lanes, and guys like Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett drawing attention away from defenses to kind of free up Klintman a little bit more. Maybe there's some improvement to be had just based on the context at the rim, but that's like a pretty concerning number. Like, the same way that last year, a guy I really loved in the draft was Kobe Buffkin, who shot like 30 or 73% at the rim as like a small guard. Guys who can score at the rim, usually a pretty good indicator for me. Guys who can't score at the rim at 6'10", like, that's a little troubling. I don't care what level of play you're at. But again, playing as a guy who's finishing off plays, cutting, getting very easy looks at the rim, I think there's probably some uptick to be had there for Klintman as well. Defensively, I think he's like, if you're going to compare him to Pacome Dadiet, I would much rather bet on Bobi Klintman's defense than Dadiet. I think Klintman, when you watch him, again, very fluid mover. I think he's just like a lot more disruptive. He's super long. He's got a 7-foot wingspan, maybe 7'1". He's just like a longer, sort of more gangly player than Pacome Dadiet is. And I think that serves him well kind of as like a helper at the rim. He can stay in front of guys reasonably well. Although I do think with his defense, the thing that gives me some pause is he kind of has the Scotty Barnes high hips thing where it's like, is he really going to be able to stay in front of wings in the NBA? Is he going to be able to stay in front of guards if he gets switched onto them? There seems like there's a little bit of switchability in there, but maybe not a ton. And I do think, if you're trying to think of long term filling in that wing spot between RJ Barrett at the 2, Scotty Barnes at the 4, I think Klintman maybe doesn't quite fit that bill, because I just think, as someone who, is 21, a little bit more developed physically, he's not super big. Like, he's pretty lean. He's pretty spindly. I think his defense probably is better as a helper than it is as an on-ball point of attack guy down the line. And I think he can still be like a good to above average defender, but maybe less in the mold that the Raptors desperately need to add to this team. Like, they need wing stoppers so badly, almost to the point that you'd almost consider a Ryan Dunn type, although I'm still not in on Ryan Dunn, just because the offense is so bad. But man, if he was even sort of good on offense, that would be a beautiful thing, because they need that wing stopper so much. I'm not sure Bobi Klintman is really that type of guy. So it's tough, right? He's also Bobi Klintman. I'm sorry to go back to the bust name thing. Maybe it's not analytical enough for all of you, but come on, Bobi Klintman. This is an NBA player's name who's successful. I don't know, man. I don't know. it's tricky. The name thing is real. I don't know. Yeah, I don't hate Klintman. I think I actually like him as a prospect better than Dadiet. I think I'd be happier with him at 31 than Dadiet at 31, just because I think the size and just sort of the fluidity defensively is just a little bit easier to project than Pacome Dadiet, who I think there's a chance I don't think Klintman ends up being a bad defender in the NBA. I think there's actually a chance that Dadiet just never figures out how to defend at the NBA level. And so I would err slightly towards picking Bobi Klintman here in place of Pacome Dadiet. But again, I think there are other guys who should be there at 31 for the Raptors who I just kind of like more. Jalen Tyson, give me Jalen Tyson over both of these guys all day for the blend of, I think, better than people give him credit for defense and offensive creation and upside, playmaking, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, my feelings on a guy like Deron Holmes. If he's there at 31, which I doubt he will be, I'd rather go that way. I'd even rather go a more sort of tried true, maybe not super sexy wing type, but like a Kevin McCullough at 31, just for the sort of understanding that he's going to be a pretty good defensive player. It's tough. I'm not, even like an Isaiah Crawford, who I talked about way back in early in this process. I think I'm valuing defense a little more than I am sort of future offensive creation upside in this situation with the Raptors, the way they're built. And obviously you need at least 3-point shooting, at least passable 3-point shooting to be viable in any lineups going forward with the guys the Raptors currently have. But I would much rather, even like a Baylor Shireman, I think stands a better chance of being a good sort of passable defender than Pacome Dadiet does. Klintman is kind of in there too, but again, I'm not super sold on Klintman overall. Despite his potential offensive fit and his ethos really fitting what the Raptors do and are looking for, I do think his on-ball defense is the thing that kind of leaves me a little bit wanting. And I just think too with Klintman, it's a lot of interesting things. They don't quite all come together for the package to be greater than the sum of its parts or anything like that. He just kind of does stuff and doesn't really pop off the screen to me. I think, the highs for Dadiet are higher than the highs for Bobi Klintman when you go and watch their tape. And so, yeah, that's kind of the read for me on Klintman. I wouldn't be totally upset with him at 31. I think I'd prefer him to Dadiet just as a projectable piece within the Raptors rotation going forward. But I think if you're taking Bobi Klintman, you're happy if he's just a nice rotation bench player. I don't see a ton of starters upside with him. But again, open to being wrong, because everyone's wrong about the draft all the freaking time. We'll come back on the other side, close it out with a look at Johnny Furphy. Yes, Johnny Furphy. It's not a typo. That's his name. We're going to talk about the 6'9" wing from Kansas. I heard of one of those before. We'll get into that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the single best place to play daily fantasy sports, point blank, period. And it's because it's just the simplest. It's the way it should be. You're just picking against projections for stats in given games for players, more or less. It's that simple. And you can just make up to 2 to 6 entries on a given nightly entry, and you can win yourself a whole bunch of cake. You can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to make those 2 to 6 player stats projections picks, and you are locked in Of course, the NBA finals are over now, but that does not mean the hoops action stops. Women's basketball is just getting started with young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside the greats like Breanna Stewart and Asia Wilson. You could go win up to 100 times your money and cash out watching them ball out. Why not go play some prize picks for the WNBA? It's already a blast of a league to watch anyway. Add even more juice to it with your prize picks entries. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the prize picks app in your app store of choice. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 with prize picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, rounding it out here, last segment of the show, we're going to talk about Johnny Furphy, the 6'9" wing out of Kansas who shoots threes and is white. No, he is not Gradey Dick. He is Johnny Furphy. And I will say, like going in, it's going to be impossible to talk about Johnny Furphy without also invoking Gradey Dick because they went to the same program and because they do a lot of very similar things well. This is not me making a super easy comp for comp. People who listen to this podcast know I don't love making comps at all. And I do think Furphy and Gradey Dick are very different players, but I think in the context of the Raptors, talking about the things that both Furphy and Gradey Dick do well is important because I do think there would be some overlap here if the Raptors were to use one of their picks, likely number 19. I don't know if he's there at 31 on Johnny Furphy. The sort of tail of the tape on Furphy, he was a freshman this past year at Kansas, essentially replaced the role of Gradey Dick coming in for Bill Self's team. 9 points, 5 boards, 1 assist, just under a steal and 0.3 blocks per game, shot 35% on nearly 4 attempts per game, and he kind of ascended as the season went along. He became a starter in January, and he had a pretty nice close to the season for Kansas that kind of shot his draft stock up a little bit. And he's like he's a fun dude, and a big reason why he's fun. We talk about Gradey Dick, for all the good things Gradey Dick does, he is not a high flyer. Johnny Furphy can throw down some yams, and that is very exciting to me. I love dudes who dunk. The Raptors need more dudes who dunk after trading away Precious Achiuwa and OG Anunoby. Who knows what the future of Chris Boucher is going to be. The dunk quotient on this team is at a critically low state. They got to go replenish that in some way, shape, or form, ideally, because dunks are cool. But with Johnny Furphy, it's not just that. He brings three-point shooting, probably less of a sort of sure thing shooter than Gradey Dick was considered to be. Gradey Dick was widely considered to be the best shooter in last year's draft. Don't think that's the case with Johnny Furphy, although he does look like he should be able to be at least league average, probably closer to 37, 38, 39% guy. Most of his shots came on assisted looks. I think only one of his threes was unassisted this past season. He's an off-ball player, very much like Gradey Dick is. And when you watch them play, like there's that same DNA of just sort of knowing the floor, knowing where to stand, knowing where and when to cut, and how to sort of leverage what everyone else's defensive attention is into easy looks for himself. That's, I think, a through line. It makes sense that Bill Self was like, oh, this is the guy I'm going to replace Gradey Dick with, because they do that sort of off-ball stuff very similarly. I think, Furphy, probably less exciting to me as an on-ball player than Gradey. And I just think in general, if you look at his tape, it's just not super inspiring as far as his ability to shake guys. Doesn't have a lot of wiggle to him. Doesn't really get by guys super well. He's mostly, I think, going to be an off-ball player in the NBA, and he could be a very good one. I've seen comparisons invoking Lauri Markkanen, which feels kind of insane to me, but there's people can get crazy with their comps this time of year. I don't quite see that for Furphy. And frankly, maybe this is controversial, but watching Furphy play, I actually think his higher upside lies on the defensive end than on the offensive end. And that's because he's kind of a freaky athlete. Like, he's got a ton of bounce. He's got a lot of quicks. And I do think he, for the most part, has like really sound fundamentals, like sliding his feet, keeping his hands up, keeping guys in front of him. He'll get burned once in a while on blow-bys, and that's probably just like being 19 and being not very strong and not being able to hold your spot super well. There's that element of it. And look, I don't think he's ever going to be someone who you're throwing on opposing lead guards and saying, hey, like, go shut him down. But I do think specifically as like a helper, as someone who can read the defense and what's going on, very smart defender, guy who I think is just kind of always head on a swivel, looking for opportunities to go jump into the action and cause a ruckus, whether it's blowing up an action, jumping a passing lane, standing in the lane for help and sort of walling off a drive. Like, I think he's got a lot of that kind of ingrained in him as a defender. And so I actually think Furphy projects to be a better defensive player than offensive player overall in time. And again, I just think his athletic tools there are really interesting. I think, there are lots of examples of him just kind of staying in front of a guy, not overexerting himself, not getting too crazy or fast and loose with his positioning, just like staying true and strong and tall and forcing guys to just pass out and abandon their drives. That's a nice thing to have. Like, sound, smart defenders. The Raptors can use a lot of those guys. And so, while I don't think he maybe projects as like a shutdown wing guy either, and that probably is where his fit with the Raptors falls apart for me. I do think he's going to be a decent player somewhere, and I do think there's like a pretty good defensive player somewhere in Johnny Furphy. On offense, I just think there's probably too much overlap with what Gradey Dick does, what if Gary Trent Jr. is back, what he does. Like, I think ideally you're getting a little bit more creation upside. I think a Pacome Dadiet or a Bobi Klintman have a little bit more of that in their game than Johnny Furphy does. I think there's a real chance Furphy becomes just like the best productive winning NBA player of the three guys we've talked about here today because of the defensive upside. But I still think at 19, there are other guys there who I would prioritize. And I do think, just the quality of bigs who might be there at 19, the swing that would come from Khalil Ware being a two-way, three-point shooting, rim protecting big man, like totally game-changing. Yves Missi, his defensive tools and athleticism are off the charts. He's shown some juice with the ball in his hands in very, brief, sporadic stretches. That's very encouraging to me. And Kyle Filipowski at 7 feet tall with the ball skill he has, like, I just think the bigs right now who project to be in that range, Deron Holmes as well, with the sort of jack of all trades thing he does. I just think all those guys project to have a little bit more in terms of like elite NBA skills and things that swing what makes successful basketball in the modern NBA more than any of the three guys we've talked about here today. But I do like Furphy. I think he's interesting. I liked him more than I thought I would like him going in. I was just prepared. His name is Johnny Furphy. How am I going to think this guy's any good? But I do think defensively there's some interesting stuff there if he can kind of get into the right defensive system. Kind of fun, just like playing next to like a really nasty rim protector type. Put him next to Wemby. That'd be tons of fun, I think. Anyway, that's kind of the read on Furphy. If he's the pick at 19, I don't think it's the end of the world. Like, I do think there's a lot there with him that's interesting. At 31, I think that's probably just like really good value. So you accept it and you say, hey, he's not perfect, but no one at 31 is perfect. I would be fine with that. I'd probably be the most fine with Furphy of any of these three guys today, honestly, just because of the defensive tools. But and look, I could be wrong. I know. I feel like the sort of jury on Furphy is like all over the place. I feel like some really like his defensive upside. Some think he's got no shot of being a real defender. Some like his offensive upside. Some think he's got no shot of ever creating for himself. I'm probably more in the like his defense, less keen on his offense camp, but there seems to be kind of a wide range of opinions on Furphy. And again, I'm open to being wrong. I'm often wrong about draft guys. That's just the way she goes. But with that, I'm going to wrap up today's show. Thank you so much for being here. Hope this was helpful. Hope this was informative. And we'll be back again tomorrow. Katie Heindl is going to be along. We're going to set the stage a little bit for draft week and free agency week next week. And then on Monday, I'll be rolling out my official big board for guys I'd like to see the Raptors take at 19 and or 31. Not going to do a full first round big board. I'll kind of leave off guys who I assume are not going to be there at 19. Guys who, if they were at 19, are just kind of, oh yeah, they'd be number one on the board if that were to happen. But yeah, we will get into all of that next week as the draft and free agency loom. Big week next week for your Toronto Raptors. Bruce Brown, Gary Trent Jr. Contracts can be signed at any time. Who knows what's coming down here? But it's all very exciting, and we will be here. Thank you for putting up with the missed episode yesterday. Sorry for the late episode today and all that stuff. Appreciate your patience through a weird scheduling time on my end. But regular shows from now on through the draft and probably extra shows on the weekends and stuff like that too. So thank you so much for tuning in, for rocking with us, and joining the Discord. Link in the description. Of course, it's free to join. Would love to see you in there. Thank you for supporting on socials. Thank you for going to YouTube and subscribing to the YouTube channel. Thank you for going to the audio app of your choice and leaving a rating or a review. It's all so appreciated. We will wrap it there. Thanks so much for hanging. We'll talk to you Friday, another episode of Locked On Raptors. Bye-bye.